Hello, this is Larry Hedrick with Mysteries of the Superstition Mountain, where we bring the past into the present for you and our future viewers. Today we have a story by Jack San Felice.
Well, today we're going to talk about the Woodbury family, and they were a group of miners. Three of them came from California. The Eugene, George, and the mother, Abby Hatch. That was her married name. So here we go. Gene Woodbury and a fellow named Al Wright were prospectors in California. And they were suspected of doing a murder of another miner. And they had no clue that they were even suspects. Well, here we go with that story. The private detective, the newspaper writer, and some other semi-quasi law enforcement types began a chase all the way across the California desert, over hundreds of miles in the desert in search of Al Wright and Eugene Woodbury. And they followed these guys for a long time. And they finally caught up with them near a little village close to the Arizona-California border called Glamis. They catch up with these guys and they arrest them for murder. And they take them to jail. Well, they're in jail for almost a month. And nobody has come to their defense. Nobody, no judge or a court has even heard any testimony, and they're still in jail without bail. Well, you ever hear of the writ of habeas corpus? Well, they finally got in touch with a lawyer, and he came in, and that day, they released both of them on the writ of habeas corpus. The writ of habeas corpus says you got to bring the body before the court within a certain time, usually 72 hours. They never were involved in it, and they had established their alibis. So what happened? They were turned loose. Gene Woodbury, he decided that he'd look for other grounds because he got to get out of California. So they started looking for what they were going to do, and the next thing you know, they read the old newspaper clippings in Arizona about mining and gold that had been found before 1893. Well, why was 1893 important? In 1893, the standard in America was changed from silver to gold, the coinage. And that caused most, not all of the silver mines in the West to collapse. Guys were jumping out of buildings. Guys that had founded huge empires based on silver. Silver had dropped from whatever it was, $3, $4 an ounce, down to 20 cents an ounce. And that's one of the reasons that the mines, not only in Arizona, but in the West, Nevada, California, and Idaho, et cetera, they all collapsed. They all collapsed. But things now had started to settle down after 1893. And by 1905 and 1906, the Woodburys, with their mother, decide to go to Arizona and look for silver, gold, and another thing, copper. Well, you see, electricity has now been booming. Electric wires are crossing the United States, and they need this abundant supply of copper. The United States does. So they go to where it's most abundant, and that's Arizona. So these guys, the Woodburys, come to Arizona, and they are asking around who knows anything about mining in this area. They've seen a few articles and word of mouth, et cetera. Somehow they wind up with Herman Petrash. Herman Petrash, wow, what a character. Here it is, 1906. And they meet him, and he takes them up to Rogers Ridge area where there are 30 mines. 30 mines that had been worked in the 70s and 80s that had silver, gold, and copper. So they started doing their searches in and around, and this is where they searched on the onset of this. And they started finding, and they had an assayer that helped them. And they knew assay work anyhow, Gene and George Woodbury, because Richard Gerd, their uncle, he was with Al Shiplin and Ed Shiplin when they found the huge mining silver deposits around Tombstone. The Woodburys come to California, they already had experience in mining, and they've been mining old claims and whatnot in Florida. They come here and they're looking for deposits that contain the silver, gold, and copper. And they find them up on the Rogers Ridge area where they found the 30 mines that already existed. Those mines were really going strong until 1883, when there was a huge flood that flooded all the mines up in the mountain. They had no equipment at that time. There was no road up there. So they had no equipment that can drain the mines. And of course, it was expensive to do that. It took manpower, it took special equipment, and it took an energy source. So to just move that up there and was very expensive. So they started searching more and more in the area around the Rogers area. And as they drifted south, they started looking at some of the other old mining claims. And lo and behold, they go through this process of searching from the Superstition Mountains, Rogers Mountain area, the Rogers Ridge area, because that's where Herman took them. And he also took them to some other areas where he had spotted some mineral. So they searched these areas and they established five different mining companies. And they consolidated that into the Superstition Mountain Mining Company, owned by Gene Woodbury, George Woodbury, and the mother, Abby Hatch. She wasn't a miner, but they included her. That was the mother, and she, I guess, fronted some money because Richard Gerd was her brother. So I think the whole expedition was probably fronted by Richard Gerd. You see, Richard Gerd only hung on to his silver mining claims in Tombstone, the richest one, the Tough Nut, and he got over $800,000. $800,000 in the equivalent, I don't know, about $80 million today. So he's very wealthy. Very wealthy. And so I'm sure he fronted these boys in their expedition into Arizona. And they wound up in Superior because there was supposed to be copper there and silver. So that's the area they searched. And they set up 5 different locations throughout the Superstition Mountains. 5 different locations. And all of these, and they set up this mining company with stock, and they capitalized it at $500,000 at $1 a share. So I don't know how that works. You have so many shares, you can control a company, but they controlled the company at that time. So they're trying to get investors. And the more discoveries that they make that are in the newspaper, like I said, I found over 50 articles and all these mining claims. So they set up these 5 separate companies. So if they wanted to sell off one property, they could do it and still maintain control. And that basically is what they did over a long period of time there. They set up areas at the areas, they called it the Randolph, and that was right below Rogers. They called another one the Maverick, which was in Millside Canyon, and the Peacock, which was west of that, and another major company. And then they set across the street from the mill site, they set up the Robles. Now, interesting thing about the Robles mining area. The Robles mining area had high-grade copper. And it was easy to find because they were told, look for the red hills. And if you ever been up Hewitt Canyon and looked over to your right, you will see the residue, I'll say, of the Woodburys when they were there in the early 1900s and people who was there in the 1940s, et cetera. And they had found a primary mine there on the Robles thing, and it was a gold mine. So they mined gold and high-grade silver out of it. Some of the mines that they found or encountered were very, very rich. And in several of these locations, they had found gold. Some places they only dug down so far. Some they went as far as 400 or 500 feet. But they had to have money. Where did they get the money? They sold stock or they got investors. Well, I'm going to tell you a story about George Woodbury. You'll love this story. Gene Woodbury is in the middle of getting finance and getting machinery up into the Superstition Mountains. By the way, there was no road that went up to Rogers area and where the Randolph area was in the Maverick area. It stopped about halfway up there. Gene Woodbury got a contract to complete that road. So he's working on the road and he's dealing with these others, and he got these people calling him, well, not calling him, but contacting him probably by telegram from California, and they're interested. So he says, I can't go. He said, I'm going to send George. Well, he takes from the Silver Chief, which had high-grade gold in it, was known. So they take some high-grade gold, $75,000 worth. George takes it to California to get them to cement the deal for an investment company out of California. George gets to California, and he was known for loving women and having a good time. Well, something happened in California. George came back nothing. He come back with no contracts, and he had lost all the gold. $75,000 worth of high-grade gold or samples. Now, I don't know what that meant. They didn't say the value of how much ore he took. I'm guessing he had to take at least 50 pounds of ore. But gold ore, 50 pounds is not all that much. It'll fit in a basket probably, or a little more, depending on how it was assayed out. So that they were dependent on that money. That gold ore that went to California, they were dependent on that, of getting some financing to finish some of the other projects. Like I say, they had 5 projects, and they included, I didn't go back down, so they included going south, the Hewitt, the Robles, the Hewitt, the Peacock, and then further down. But that's not all. About this time, George comes back from California. There is a strike of what's considered a mother lode in the area near Superior. In fact, they had the Silver King, which had high-grade silver, and then they went down, and they had founded in the 1800s a mine called the Silver Queen. Well, an investor and mining magnate from back east named Boyce Thompson bought the Silver Queen sight unseen. He had sent his boys, his engineers and geologists, out there by train, but before they got there, he had already bought the properties. He had already bought it. Well, guess what? Before he bought those properties, George and Gene Woodbury, along with a fellow named George Lobb, bought some of the mining claims around the original Silver Queen property. And when Boyce Thompson comes out, and they were valued at $20,000 a claim. So that gave him a little influx of money, about 40 grand. Now, George Lobb had been with the Silver King mine from the start. And he has money invested in it. And they also went as far as Florence. And they take their geologists, engineers, they've been all over the place. So they go as far as Florence, and they found some high-grade copper under the earth there. They found a high deposit, but they never really got, they filed on it, but they never really opened up a mining operation. The Woodburys have all of this information. And on their claims, by the way, they filed on 120 mining claims in the Superstition area, plus the 2 out there in Superior and a couple near Florence. So that probably 118 mining claims in the Superstition Mountain. No wonder there were so many holes in the ground over there. But what happened? Why did it not ever be fruitful? Well, they're rolling along and they're making money. They are shipping carloads of ore. And by the way, Gene Woodbury finished the road all the way up to Rogers Trough area, what we know Rogers Trough. The Woodburys got involved anyhow was the 2 reasons: the need for copper, and 2, that was a new process for developing gold and silver and extracting it from the ore. And that was called cyanide process. And it right down about 300 yards from Rogers Trough, up on the hillside to the north, they established a mill there, and they called that mill the Woodbury Mill. And for years, that place was referred to. When I first come out here in the early 90s, there were still bits and pieces of the old mill up there, left up there. And probably if you went back today, you could find little bits and pieces of the junk and debris that was left from that era. So they were mining gold and silver and using that money to refinance, to try to find that mother lode of copper. Try to find, because they felt within the copper, the richer the copper, the more gold and silver there is. See, copper in Arizona is not found by itself. It's found along with other metals. And reading the reports of the Magma Mining Company, and now it existed from 1912 until the mill shut down, the Magma Mining Company's mills shut down in 1996. So I was out here to see them working. So the Woodburys were involved in dabbling in a lot of 120 claims, looking for the mother lode. It seems like every time they get started, something happened. So what happened, the first thing, George lost $75,000 in high-grade gold on a trip to California. What else can happen? So World War I comes along. They shut down mining for the most part in America. They've kept the copper mines running because they needed to make brass shells. And in order to get brass, you need copper. And so the copper mines was going. They still were in some level of operation. So what happened? After World War I, they're still, because the newspaper reports still have them in the Superstition, trying to sell these claims for copper and with gold and silver. The next thing that happened is the early 1920s. America had a panic on banks, and it really affected Arizona. As a matter of fact, the Pinell County banks shut down. Pinell County Bank was later called National Bank, First National Bank, I think, of Arizona. I think so, but I'm not sure. But anyhow, all their money, operating money, after World War I, was tied up in the banks, the Pinell County Bank. And their stock was all in the banking industry. What did they do? They lost it. It was locked up. They couldn't get their money. So mining took another hit. It got shut down again in the West. All over America, actually. And before you know it, the days go by and we're 1929 and kibosh, the stock market crash of 1929. Beyond that, he still held hope. Gene Woodbury still held hope up until just before he died that he could still hit the mother lode in the super, because he got all these mining men and engineers that dug holes and test holes, told him there was a lot of valuable ore there. And this report by the one company, it said, this is great. You have the fundamentals here that you need to have a major mining operation here. Well, we all know that never occurred. I want to regress back to the days of the Lost Dutchman, who was in the Superstition Mountains, and he allegedly uttered some clues. And I wanted to go out there to see if fundamentally where I had found a mine, and a lot of my contemporaries believed that it could be the Dutchman because it had high-grade ore in it, high-grade gold ore. Of course, that mine is closed today, and the floods of last year and the year before have just totally wiped out the location of where it was, the pit mine. That mining area held quite an interest for me because of the Dutchman supposedly been out in that area, his mine. Supposedly he gave some clues. One of the clues he gave was that the setting sun will shine in my mind. It shines through a window arch on my mind. I said, I've seen a lot of arches, a lot of window arches in the mountains, in the Superstition Mountain, maybe 100. I said, they're all over the place. But when I was exploring that area up there near Woodbury Valley, at the west end of Woodbury Valley, on the far east side of LaBarge Mountain, on top of it, there are two that I saw from the east are two arches. I decided to go over there, and since this is an area where a lot of mining interest had taken place, I'd go over and see how big these arches actually were. If you look at the arch from a distance, it's that big. But in reality, when you climb the west side of LaBarge Mountain, it's 20 feet high and 20 feet wide, but in a triangle. It goes up at an angle, and then the bottom is about 20. It's huge. A friend of mine, Steve Bowser, decided to climb up there and would get photos of him up there. And so some photos were taken. And when you look at a small photo, you can't see him. You have to blow it up and really enlarge it to see him inside there, because he's just a dot from the distance. You can't see him at all. So that was one of the things. Now, what about, how does this work into the Dutchman story and that clue? Well, Searching in that particular area, there's a mine there, but nobody knew what the name. They're the residues of a mine there. It's a shaft mine. And the dumps are still above it. And there was still some of the workings there. Some of the timbering was up top for where they would draw the ore up from inside the shaft. Well, could this is close to it. So I'm out there one day, and when the sun is setting in the west, it shines through that arch, and it does shine on that mine. Later we found that mine was called the Lazy Mule, and the last time it was worked on, it was filed as a mining claim, a lode mine for gold and silver by Carl and Eva Smith. There's a famous photo floating around. I have it in my book. In the Woodbury Valley, there beside the shack, what was called the Woodbury Cabin, where what's left there now is just a windmill, But Carl and Eva Smith they stayed in that cabin, and they kept their explosives near that cabin. And they had done a lot of prospecting in that area. And one of the mines they developed was a trench mine where they got a piece of equipment and they actually dug a ditch. And within that ditch, you could see, and it's up not far from the road going to Rogers Trough. And every now and then there was a turnoff in that area. And they would come in, and people would come in, and they would see the chalcopyrite, they would see the green of chrysocolla and the blue of azurite. And they would dig in there and do some more sampling and whatnot. But they never really developed it. Carl and Eva Smith never really developed it. I don't know why. I don't know the story on that. Maybe somebody can do some research on it and pick it up. So there's that clue. The sun, it does shine on there, and supposedly gold was taken from the Lazy Mule. I don't know how it got this name, but the Lazy Mule mine that was named by Carl Smith. As a matter of fact, on the old cabin, his name was in big letters, Carl, and he had it right over the front door. And also there was a little note there that says, danger, explosives within. They were sleeping right there in the same place that were explosives. I hope they weren't smoking cigarettes or a pipe. Now there's another story that picked up, and this is a story I tried to find. When Billy Martin Jr. in the early 90s told me the story, and he was the first cowboy I met, of the horse trail. Because I said, I'm going to do a story about cowboys. And I did. I put a book out called Superstition Cowboys. And in there, I quote Billy Martin. And in fact, he took me up to, through the gate, up to the Woodbury, and showed me where the trail was. And at that time in the 90s, people were still going up there. People from the Heron Ranch looking for their cattle, and people from the JF Ranch looking for their cattle up there on the hillsides of Woodbury, where there were some lush areas on both sides of Hewitt Canyon Road that went up there. Well, I wanted to, and one of the clues that the Dutchman said again, he said, this is alleged. Now, I'm alleged because nobody can prove it. That he said that from above my mind, I can see the soldiers and people on the old military trail. But they cannot see me. And the area he's talking about was the saddle on Rogers Ridge. Went dipped down into a saddle, and there was a digging there. There was a mine right there. And matter of fact, the pit, above the pit mine, wasn't far from the top. And there was diggings on the west side too. So I don't really know what he was talking about, but I'm going to see, does this make sense? Now, I had already been up from the bottom, but I was by myself then. That's back in the 90s. Now I'm going to go back and I find out more information. I'm going to say, does this thing work? Can you see people from the top but not from the bottom? I go up there with my friend Steve Bowser, and Steve, I take him over to drop him off where he's going to walk across the mountains and to that old horse trail. And from then we had walkie-talkies, and I'm going to drive back around to Woodbury and walk across there where that horse trail comes down. I'm going to see if I can see him. So he's ready to come down. I said, I don't see it, Steve. Well, lo and behold, that's a mile and a half down. A mile and a half down. Down from the top, which close over 5,000 feet, the highest peak, down to the basin where the old JF trail was. And so I'm on the old horse trail right at the bottom. I can't see him. He's halfway down. I still don't see him. He's 3/4 of the way, and I still don't see him. And then all of a sudden, he emerges when he's about a quarter or maybe an eighth of a mile from me. You just can't see him because the land dips and around and it curves the trail, and as he dips to it, you can't see anybody. I said, okay, we couldn't see you. So later, 2 years later, I said, I want to go down that horse trail. I want to see if we can see. Now, what is there that would resemble a human being about the size? There were cows there and calves, and the calf was small, about the size of a human. I said, we went to the old mine, we did a little prospecting there, and then on our way back, I said, we're going to take the horse trail down. So me and another fella take the horse trail down. By that time, with all the rains and erosion that had taken place over the years, and the grass was about over waist high. So we were trying to walk through the grass, and we're stumbling on these little rocks and boulders. Can't see them. So it takes a long time to get to the bottom. But the final say on this from me is, when I'm at the top, I can see the calves on the JF trail. The calves, the cows, and the bull. Big old black bull, Black Angus. But all the way down, we could see those calves from the gap, and right on the other side is that one pit, and right below that is the pit mine, where it was called the Silver Chief, where ostensibly gold and silver was taken out of there. Well, I know there's gold there because I had it assayed. The ore assay, the waste rock assayed half ounce per ton of waste rock. And when you're mining for gold, if you had equipment, heavy duty equipment, you'd make a lot of money. There's no doubt in my mind that the clue of the Dutchman says where I can see people, soldiers, on the old military trail. There's been really no old military trail established per se through the mountains. But John Bork, in his travels through the Superstitions, chasing the Apaches in the time General Crook was here in the 1870s, mapped that area. And he actually mapped the JF trail, but there wasn't the JF there at that time. The JF wasn't established till about mid to late 1880s, when Jack Frazier won 50 cows in a bet over who was going to win an election. But there's no doubt in my mind that if that was a military trail, you could see people on it. If the Dutchman said if. So I verified two things. One, there was a window thing there, and arch that did shine on a mine that produced gold. And two, you know how stories get convoluted over the years. You don't know what to believe. And you can see people on the old JF trail, which was, according to John Bork in his drawing, that he called it where the soldiers had actually gone. He didn't say military trail, but where the soldiers actually traveled throughout the Superstition from Tortilla and went through the mountain through Tortilla Pass down to what was now known as the JF. So that's a couple of things that and there's a couple other areas too. Up there on top of the area by the horse trail, if you look to the east, you can see two columns. Allegedly stated by the Dutchman, there are two columns on the way. And I knew this story from the early 1900s. Greg Davis and I searched that area to no end looking for two columns. We didn't know where they were. You saw a lot of columns that might have been close together. But if you're on that old horse trail, you look to the east, you can see the two columns. And then after the fire, you can really see them. The other little thing on the way to those, on the way from the horse trail going east a little bit, not too far, I found an old cache spot where somebody could have hid something. And it could have been ore because I found pieces of, it's all granite there, but inside there were pieces of quartz, little pieces of white quartz scattered around. So somebody had set something in there. Some prospector over the years may have found something and put it in there because he couldn't carry it out. If you tried in the old days to carry out 50 pounds of ore, which don't take much to make 50 pounds, because that's pretty dense ore up there, you wear yourself out. So you want to have these little spots where you could hide some and then come back at a later date and get it. There was nothing there. And Tom Collenborn, who wrote, noted historian of the late Tom Collenborn, great man, great historian. And he writes the Apache Junction News for years and called Collenborn's Chronicles. In one of the chronicles, he cites the story of the two columns, and he even draws a sketch of the two columns. And by God, they look just like. They look just like they curve like that. They curve near the top like that, a little bit. They're about 25 feet high, just enough for the trees to overgrow them before the fire. But after the fire, now you can see them. That's another one of the clues. You know, spent years up there. After spending years on the west side, near Weaver's Needle and Black Mountain and all those areas in search of gold, where I didn't find any, I did find some in some of the mines and in Millsite Canyon. The gold is 79% gold and 21% silver. So when you combine gold and silver, and a lot of times in the mountain areas in where you find copper and gold and silver, the gold combines with something, and the gold and the silver is called electrum, E-L-E-C-T-R-U-M, electrum. That means gold and silver. There's also gold mixed in copper, mixed into copper ore, but it's not easily distinguishable. At the Silver King mine, there was a lot of gold within copper ore, but it just wasn't distinguishable. So those stories there of the Woodburys, and you know, they were so close. And did they mine the old Silver Chief? Did they find gold? That's written in the newspaper, the old newspaper articles. And the story of the chase, the Woodburys had a lot of experience, and some of it wasn't always good. And when they sent George to California, lost 75 grand. Wow, that put him under. I think that might have put him under. I will say that at this time, I want to summarize what I've done. There were 4 stories that I put together and called a saga. The saga of Lost El Dorado, and things that make sense and apply to my search for the Lost Dutchman mine, and Lost El Dorado, as I called it. That was the beginning episode. We talked about Lost El Dorado itself and my search for Lost El Dorado up in the Northeast Mountains. The second one was about P.C. Bicknell, who wrote and coined the phrase, the Lost Dutchman mine. He was a writer, newspaper man writer and a prospector. And he had actually found gold in a mine in Cave Creek, and there was a mine collapse and his partner got killed. So he never went in another mine. He said he never went in another mine. Doesn't mean what people didn't go in there. The story I told on the third episode was Herman Petrash and the first Dutch hunters. And so I'm leading together, bringing these together, this information that makes sense in the Northeast Mountains. And when I come to the Woodburys and find out how many mining claims, that they have 120 and 75,000 in gold and hundreds of thousands. They sold one of their properties off for $100,000, which would worth millions today. And the fact that gold and copper found in small amounts. Nobody's found the mother lode for gold, but nobody's reopened the old Silver King area. And so gold is out there. And people have said that there's no gold, no silver, no copper throughout the mountains, no mineral. That's not true. The gold is out there. You can still find some. The mineral is out there. Copper, silver, it's still out there. And there's, within some of the ore, there's found something, when they assayed it, called bismuth. B-I-S-M-U-T-H. Now, I had no clue. I think I have some bismuth. I had no clue what bismuth is. But one thing, when I read about it, it said bismuth is used in combining alloys, in making alloy metals. And another thing it's used for in pharmaceutical. I said, wait a minute, how can you make alloys and then you have pharmaceuticals? Well, guess what? Bismuth was the foundation of something called Pepto-Bismol. And probably you've been taking bismuth. A lot of people have been taking it for years and years and didn't know that it came from metal in the ground. So, folks, I've enjoyed putting this sagas together. Now I'm back in the saddle. I'm back on. I'd like to go on with some more stories about what happened in various parts of the Superstition Mountains. And the question I have is, did George Woodbury or did Gene Woodbury find gold enough in those mountains to sustain them? Gene Woodbury, for 25 years, 35 years of living in the Superior area. One of the strange mysteries I found in all of this story, I could never find a photograph of either George or Gene or Abby Hatch. Found a lot of photographs of Richard Gerd. The closest I can come of finding a photograph of Gene Woodbury was a woodcut made during that long chase through the California desert in 1896 when he was falsely accused of murder. Falsely accused of murder. That's the only image that I have, a woodcut. Is it accurate? We don't know. One of the mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.
Thank you for watching this episode of Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.